Our Plant Stories has been nominated as a finalist in the Independent Podcast Awards in a new category called Environment and Natural World. I'll let you know how we get on. Thanks to all those who are regular supporters of the podcast with their commitment to buying a monthly coffee. And to Anne, who also sent some caffeine my way this month, all of which goes towards paying for this podcast, the hosting platform and the editing programme. The link is in the show notes. And now, a plant story. Welcome to Our Plant Stories. I sometimes get asked where I find the plant stories. And if you're curious, then you might enjoy reading the short weekly blog I write about the behind the scenes of making a podcast like this. You can subscribe via the website, ourplantstories.com. Just click on About in the top bar. Today's story starts back in the summer of 2024. We had been lucky enough to spend a week in Paris for the Olympics. We had loved them when they were in London in 2012 and always promised ourselves that if they came again to Europe, we would try to get some tickets. The following week, we potted off to the Loire, which was where we happened to cross Les Grottos, the smallest of the greatest castles. Lovingly restored by its present owners as a hotel, it has an incredible history dating back to 1620, when the current castle was built on the foundations of an older house. In 1798, Charles-Joseph Bagieux became the owner. Keen on horticulture, he created a large English-style park. And we're standing in that park, looking at the riverbank at the beginning of this episode, because by chance, just a few days earlier, an enormous tree has fallen.
It fell at about 10 past 6. 10 or 15 minutes before, there were a guided tour, and they were just under the trees, you imagine, yeah? And there were no wind. It just fell like that because it was very, very wet, a lot of rain, and the water was very high and go under the roots and take off the ground, and after it fell, yeah.
But it wasn't just any tree, because Charles-Joseph was employed in military subsistence, and supplying the army with food meant he had a friendship with Napoleon Bonaparte, who held him in high esteem. I hope you're beginning to see why I knew we had a plant story here.
And my name is Gaël Duhalgouet, the owner of the chateau.
Tell me what we're looking at.
So this, unfortunately, this tree fell about 3 or 4 weeks ago. It's a Bald Cypress. This is the last expedition of Napoleon I in Louisiana, 1802. In 1802, Louisiana is not the small state that you know in the US now. It was nearly 1/3 of the US. Imagine the USA divided by 3, all the middle vertically, belonging to France. In 1802, the empire is organizing the last expedition, and they will come back with a Bald Cypress, this one, which is about 222 years old, and which has been given as a parcel from Napoleon I to the owner of this small chateau. This owner was called Charles-Joseph Bagieux. Charles-Joseph Bagieux was an important man for Napoleon Bonaparte. He was in charge of feeding all the soldiers of the Napoleon Bonaparte army, a huge army. And he was very, very close friend, and Charles-Joseph Bagieux was very loyal during all the life of Napoleon Bonaparte to the emperor. So when he has made this huge English park in this little chateau, he asked to Napoleon I to bring back from different expeditions new trees. And it's important in France at this period, the very beginning of the 19th century, when you make an English park, to have trees that nobody else have, to be the first one in France. And this is the first Bald Cypress in France, yeah. So coming from Louisiana, it's an incredible tree. The Bald Cypress is one of the exceptions because they lose completely their pins in winter. That's the name Bald Cypress. And before losing their pins, they get incredible color. We consider it as one of the most nicest trees of autumn. It goes from green to yellow, from yellow to red, from red to brown. When it's completely brown, everything falls. And whatever the period is, it's always a very, very, very nice tree. This tree in Louisiana has a very, very, very long life. We know that some trees are 100 years old. And here, it's different because it's not the same climate. So we don't know, without this problem with the river and the rain, how long it will have be alive, how long it would have been. But 220 years, so it's a pity, and we are very sad to see this tree now down. Yeah. The second particularity of these trees is normally they are growing in the water completely. And they are growing in the water in lake or river, and suddenly the roots are growing completely vertically. The American calls them knees, until they get oxygen out of the water. It's very, very unusual to see all these knees all around these trees. Yeah, it's really a very, very nice tree.
Tell me how it fell. Did you see it fall? What happened?
I didn't see, I wasn't there at this moment, but from March until June, we had a lot of rain. The river was always very, very high, and with the water going very quick, and this take off a lot of ground around the tree, which was bending a little bit and very, very big. And one day, unfortunately, 6:10, the tree fell. Yeah.
What did you feel when you saw it?
Very, very, very sad. It was one of the nicest trees of the park, and for all the visitors, it's a very important tree, especially for the Americans. They were all taking photos on the Bald Cypress, because for them it's a very important. It's 1802, just 1 year after, 1803, Napoleon I is going to sell all the Louisiana to our American friends so they can have this huge country. So this tree is a very strong symbol for them when they visited this chateau. So they were all taking photos. We are very sad now to see it down, yeah. And with this tree down, we cannot see the Eiffel Bridge behind. So it's impossible to let it like that, even if it seems that it's still alive because it's still green. But it's impossible to let it. We'll have to cut it during the winter period and burn it, unfortunately.
Yes, Gail did say the Eiffel Bridge, made by Gustave Eiffel. Apparently there are only 3 in the grounds of French chateaux, and this is one of them. Gail was recorded on my phone, and sometimes stories take a little while before they find their way to here. But armed with the knowledge that the Bald Cypress is the state tree for Louisiana, let me introduce you and Gail to Harvey Stern, who is the founder of the Louisiana Purchase Cypress Legacy.
Yes, hello Harvey.
Bonjour, comment ça va?
Oh Harvey, ça va être très simple en français.
Un peu. Je parle un peu.
C'est bien. Formidable. Peut-être mieux que mon anglais.
When I visited your chateau, or stayed at your wonderful chateau in the Loire, it was about 3 weeks earlier that the Bald Cypress had fallen. It was obscuring the view of the very, very beautiful Eiffel Bridge that you have. And you said, we're going to have to clear that over the winter. So did you clear it? Is it now
I'm working right now on it, yeah. This morning, and but it's a job for work for about two weeks, yeah.
So Harvey, you're in Louisiana, you're in New Orleans.
Right.
Tell us your connection to the Bald Cypress.
Well, I guess my connection goes back to when I first moved to Louisiana, New Orleans, back in 1980. With the conservation clubs like the Sierra Club and on my own, I canoed a lot around New Orleans, which is, as you may know, still surrounded largely by swamps, forested wetlands, and that's where I first encountered the cypress. This is going back 45 years ago. And it occurred to me that, a lot of these cypress still look pretty old, and it's kind of neat to just kind of go out and not just canoe, but to kind of discover these old cypress that are sometimes kind of, I call them hiding in plain sight. They're really treasures hiding in plain sight. So that's how it all started.
And what I love is there's a connection between the two of you, I feel, and between these trees, because when we talked, Gail, you talked about how your Bald Cypress, the one that fell, was a gift.
Yes.
Brought back from Napoleon in 1802.
Yes, that's right.
And your project, Harvey, starts with the Bald Cypress that existed in 1803.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting connection, and it's really for the first time you made the direct connection between is it Gail
Yeah.
and my project to kind of bring us up to when I first came to New Orleans. But by the time 2003 came around, which was 23 years later, this was the 200th anniversary of the Louisiana Purchase in America.
Mm-hmm.
And by that time, I had found many more old trees throughout, not just the New Orleans area, but throughout Louisiana. And it occurred to me that people knew about these old trees, but they didn't know how old they are for the most part. And a lot of them knew maybe where they were in their own neighborhood or their own parish, but they didn't realize how many there were throughout the state of Louisiana, which I had started exploring more by 2003. So I thought, wouldn't it be neat to be able to start taking borings from these trees and to find out how old they were, just so folks would get an idea of how really old these trees were. And when I started this off, I really had no idea that I would be finding trees not only alive in 1803, but for example, in the case of Gail's tree, I ended up finding trees that were several hundred years old at the time of the gift of Napoleon of your tree.
Yes.
Of your tree. So even when your tree was just starting out, I'm finding trees that were alive several hundred years earlier. So it is a very neat connection. Yeah.
And how is the Louisiana Purchase seen from a French perspective?
Now most of the French people are forgotten of all of this period, unfortunately. And when our American friends come at the chateau, it's completely different because it's an important part of the American history. So they were all going for a photo just under the Bald Cypress, yeah, because it's a strong symbol, you know. Mm.
And I know history is one of your things because you gave us a fantastic historical tour of the chateau. So if people did want to know about it from the French perspective, just outline for us what happens. Why does Napoleon sell it?
Why Napoleon? Yes, the period 1800. At that time, Napoleon is thinking to sell Louisiana for several reasons. The first reason is think that this huge territory will be very difficult to manage so far from France. The second reason that is think that selling to our American friends this huge country so that they can have these beautiful and big countries, the French influence will be higher than the English one. And you know that the English were the enemy of Napoleon. So I don't know if it is a success, but that it was thinking for. Yeah.
So realistically, it was too far away. It wasn't going to be
Yes.
possible to keep control
Yes.
of, basically.
Yes. Yeah. He also need a little money to make some wars in, in Europe also.
But is that correct in the size, what it does to the size as well, Harvey? It doubles virtually the size
Yes,
of America?
Louisiana Purchase roughly doubled the size.
Yeah.
It's significant for that reason alone, and the politics behind it are pretty intriguing. And but it was, yeah. If it weren't for Napoleon, I don't think that the purchase would have taken place, right, Gail? From what I understand, he was instrumental in bringing it about. And if it weren't for Napoleon, westward expansion in the United States would not have happened. And by the way, it's, the cypress, and it gets into the whole ecological value of cypress. They certainly don't stop at the Louisiana state line. They go up into Arkansas. They go up much farther than people. Actually, bald cypress go up as far as New Jersey, as far as their location. And some of the biggest bald cypress are up in North Carolina, where an academic researcher has found bald cypress upwards of 1,800, 2,000 years old along what's a river called the Black River in coastal North Carolina. So it's not just Louisiana where you can find these amazing old bald cypress.
How had they survived? Because what were people in New Orleans using these trees for, Harvey?
Yeah, people, not only the people in New Orleans, but going back to the Cajuns in central Louisiana and the Native Americans, the Chitimacha and the Tunica, and the Houma Indians throughout the state of Louisiana were using the cypress for sustenance. Because they grow in water, they make great pirogues. They're used to the water, and they make not only do they make great pirogues, but for the Cajuns and for the New Orleanians, they're great for housing construction in the wet climate of New Orleans and South Louisiana, because just by nature of where they grow, they make great houses and pirogues and things that need to survive in hot, humid weather of Louisiana.
What was that word you used again?
Pirogues? Is that they're French for? I think I
Pirogue.
know it.
Pirogue.
Pirogue. Yeah, it's a
Same word.
It's a small boat
Yes.
that is used by the Cajuns
On
and
lakes
by the Native Americans to go fishing and crawfishing and to get around from place to place in the swamps of Louisiana. Maybe a little bit off from my French pronunciation for pirogue.
Pirogue.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, c'est ça.
So the trees that you found had survived. Why? Why had your ones not been, taken down and used as housing?
It's I think for several reasons. One of the chief reasons is that the trees that I'm finding that are several hundred years old were hollow at the time that logging really started taking off in central Louisiana in the mid to late 19th century. So when the Cajun loggers and the others logging crews came through in the mid 1800s, late 1800s, the trees that I'm finding had been alive so long that they had hollowed out, which is what older cypress tend to do. And the reasons for why they hollow out but are still healthy, I think, are debatable. But the fact is that most of the oldest trees that I find, the ones that are 300 years old and older, are hollow. And so at the time in the 1850s and later, when logging began, there were so many other cypress that were not hollow, the younger cypress, which were obviously much more valuable to the lumber companies than the hollow trees, from which you couldn't get nearly as much lumber. So the cypress that I'm finding, even though the oldest ones are largely hollow, they still survive through their growth through the outside bark. They don't need to be fully intact to continue thriving each spring. And I was out just yesterday in one of my favorite areas, and interestingly enough, called King George Bayou, which is probably an interesting story in itself on how it became King George Bayou. But finding we didn't quite get to the old cypress that I landmarked there many years ago, but that's a good example of a several hundred-year-old cypress that was hollow, but is still surviving and growing to this day, and just inspirational to see.
Gail, have you ever been to Louisiana?
Never.
Have you ever
I
seen
would
them
love to.
growing? Oh, have you got any questions for Harvey in that case?
Well, I understood that you were just speaking about Bald Cypress, age 700 years, but what did you find as the oldest one?
I'll go straight to the answer, and I'm saying I'm finding trees well over 1,000 years old. We're talking probably as old as the famed redwoods and sequoias in the western part of the United States that are such major tourist attractions. But in terms of giving you exact age, I just have to say that I did not start this off. I'm not a scientist per se. I'm just a fellow that loved the outdoors, who has been involved with environmental issues through my job with the City Planning Commission in New Orleans, and I was a coastal zone manager. So I know about ecology. But this effort is not to get the exact age of the trees, partly because, as I talked about earlier, that these trees being hollow, it's very, very difficult to get a core that goes all the way into the heart of the tree. If the tree is if it's hollow, I can usually only get a 5 or 6 inch core. But it's enough of a core, and I'm able to estimate based on these cores how old the trees are. And in many cases, trees are 1,500, upwards of 2,000 years old. And these have been, in some cases, verified by the scientists, by the dendrochronologists who for a living study the ages of trees. So we're talking trees that are 1,500 years old and older, and so those are the rare exceptions still. Most of them I'm finding of the older trees are upwards of 1,000 years old. Yeah. But some of the oldest have been up to 1,500 years. And these are trees that are about 25 to 30 feet in circumference. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about very large cypress. And also the important thing to note is that if you've seen pictures of cypress, you know that they have we call them the buttress or the swelling at the bottom, and then they go straight up, the trunk goes straight up. So the trick is to get the circumference measured at the above the buttress. It's from that trunk that we are able to get a boring, and from that boring we're able to get enough of a core usually to get an estimate. But getting back again, this is not a strictly scientific estimate. The effort from the very beginning was just to show that we do have trees that were alive at the time of the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, yes. Which, again, that date was chosen again because folks can relate to that in Louisiana. It's a part of their elementary history course. Everybody knows about Louisiana, and I'm sure the French do for that matter too. So the effort at the beginning was just to show that we have trees that were alive in 1803, and if I'm off by, 50 or 100 years in case of the older trees, so what? They're still, maybe 700 years old instead of really 800 if you were to do a DNA analysis. But the effort is to show that we really have these old trees around, and they're really worth revering and protecting and keeping the habitat alive.
Do you think, Harvey, that in the US you have some other tree as old as the Bald Cypress, or it is a record life?
Well, yes, actually the tree experts, the arborists and the ecologists have documented there are trees called the bristlecone pine trees in California, which again kind of belie their appearance. These are scraggy little trees, kind of look like juniper trees in the rocks of California that are at least as old as the oldest cypress that I found, and which brings up another issue, is that the width and the height of the cypress belie the age. I've found cypress as small as 10 foot in circumference that are several hundred years old because they grow so slowly. But as far as other trees, the bristlecone pine trees, the sequoias, and the redwoods up in Northern California, up through Oregon into British Columbia. These are huge, beautiful old trees that are among major tourist attractions that grow easily as old as the cypress that I found. And it brings up another thing that's been gratifying about the cypress legacy, is that it's really become finding these old growth cypress and finding where I put plaques up that proclaim these trees alive in 1803. These have really become ecotourism destination spots in many cases. A lot of the ecotourism groups now, at least there's 2 or 3 now that I can think of that they paddle out or kayak out to a tree that I have a plaque up on, and it's kind of the culmination of their tour to say, look, this tree has been plaqued and that it's been alive at least since the time of the Louisiana Purchase, and they explain a little about what I've been up to, and it's a way to get the word out that these trees are still around. They haven't all been cut down, and they're worth appreciating and keeping the habitat healthy so that these trees can continue their long, healthy lives for maybe another 100 years at least. Mm.
So what does this tree mean is there kind of folklore around this tree, Harvey? Is there other kind of significance to this tree in Louisiana?
Yeah, I think I had actually just discovered on my own, in terms of the significance of the tree, I'd like to tie it in, for example, to the Native Americans who've lived in the area where these trees have been for centuries. Another group, the Baton Rouge Audubon Society, took one of the trees that I cored. This is an area near Baton Rouge, the state capital, in I guess you could call it still coastal Louisiana. And it was a tree that I determined to be about 600 years old. And the leader of the Baton Rouge Audubon Society took it on herself to contact the Chitimacha people that still are sprinkled throughout this area where they lived in numbers previously. And the tree that I cored, this Audubon, National Audubon Society person asked one of the Chitimacha after she took them out there to, what can we call this tree to really honor it and show the significance of it to the Chitimacha people? And the Chitimacha representative said, let's call it Yagi Nixta, which means the strong spirit, which I really think captured what the Native Americans, and particularly the Chitimacha in this case, felt this tree meant to them. In many cases, it's difficult to articulate. You know, you can talk about how beautiful these trees are, but for people like the Native Americans, not just with old-growth cypress, but with many other of the older trees throughout the Northwest, there's a spiritual significance that these trees carry that goes beyond just their aesthetic beauty. And I think this gets at what I'm hoping to promote as a way to think about these trees is that, yes, they help to build New Orleans and to build pirogues, but that they shouldn't be cut down as commodities, that especially these old trees need to be looked at as for the way the Indians did, as for their spiritual significance, that they have beauty, not just their outward physical beauty, but the fact that they've survived 600 years, 700, way over 1,000 years. There's this kind of ineffable character to them that the Native Americans recognized, and even the Cajuns recognized in some cases. And many of the people that have contacted me are Cajuns themselves, going back, whose families go back to the 1700s, 1800s, who say, I've heard about your aging these trees. I've got a really neat old tree on this property. It's big. It's much bigger than the other ones. Can you come out and tell me how old it is? Because we think of it as part of our family. It's been in our family for generations, which is another way to think about these old trees. It's kind of senior citizens that are part of the families of the folks on whose property it's located, and who need to be revered and respected for having survived so many generations. And it's also a way that the Cajuns and others can tie themselves back to their earlier generations, to their ancestors, through these trees that have survived so much upheaval, culturally, politically, naturally, hurricanes, lightning storms, you name it, and they're still kicking after how many hundreds of years. It's just for that reason alone, they're significant to so many people. And they're part of the natural heritage of Louisiana. It is the state tree. And when I started this off in 2003, I was able to get the state legislators to proclaim April of 2003 Louisiana Purchased Cypress Heritage Month. So it's struck a chord from the beginning, and it's carried through to this day.
Done a great job, Harvey, haven't you? I mean, that's just beautiful. And I think actually that name is rather more beautiful than the Bald Cypress, which basically presumably refers to the fact that it's deciduous and it loses all its needles. And that's why it became called the Bald Cypress. I think their naming of it is rather more beautiful.
Yes, I agree.
It's wonderful, the story that comes out of just literally witnessing your tree gale at your chateau and seeing it fallen. I had no idea it would lead me down this road, or lead all of us down that road, really, of a very different kind of tree. We always have a kind of how to grow section of this podcast, and I certainly am not proposing to grow a bald cypress where I live in central London with a garden the size of a postage stamp. But for anybody who has a larger estate, possibly has water, probably needs water, can both of you give me a little bit of advice on how to grow one? Gail, do you want to start?
I know. I think it's really very, very easy. It's not a problem. Yeah, in France. Yeah, all the people I know who have planted the bald cypress, there is no problem. Yeah, it's easy. Yeah.
Would they plant it in the water itself
most
these days?
of them are at the bank of the water in France. Yeah.
And the climate suits them? They're happy
yes,
with the climate?
Perhaps
they're happy
not
to
in
grow?
the south, I don't know, but in our region there is no problem. There are a lot, yeah.
Harvey?
Well, I think your answer, probably, Gail, is that they need to be, I do know this, is that they need to be planted on dry land as much as we think of them as water dependent. The seedlings need dry land to get their start. And once they, at least in Louisiana, we're talking about more the wetland areas. Once they are able to start, then they need a particular regimen of water to keep growing, but then they also need drier periods. And that What that regimen is, I think, is still up for debate, and it's part of the reason that we need to preserve what we have, because many areas of Louisiana that the cypress are not regenerating. The exception, though, is ironically are in the middle of the cities like New Orleans. In the upland areas, in neighborhoods in New Orleans, there have been many successful cypress planted. They tend to grow much faster. Apparently, the soils and other conditions are good for rapid growth. And you can walk through the neighborhoods in New Orleans and see cypress all over, some of them pretty large. But in New Orleans, the trees that are maybe 12, 13 foot in circumference may not be much more than 100 years old, as opposed to in the swamps where they could be 600 or 700 years old with the same circumference because they've grown much more slowly.
If I plant a bald cypress sapling, assuming I can easily get hold of one, how fast will it grow?
You know, after 10 years, you would have a cypress, I would say at least 10 to 20 feet, if not more, 20 to 30 feet. They grow very quickly in the city of New Orleans, and I can't tell you why, but they do.
Thank you both. I feel, Gail, that you need to do an American tour of trees.
Yes, we'd love to have you. Love to show you around, Gail and
yes,
Sally.
I would love to. Yeah.
Wouldn't it be great if one day Gail and Harvey meet up and explore the bald cypress trees of Louisiana, thanks to that gift of a tree from Napoleon to his friend Charles Joseph. If you enjoy these plant stories and you want to keep them coming, then supporting the podcast through Buy Me a Coffee, which is the gift of a virtual coffee, is a great way to do it, and I will be very grateful. I love making this podcast, but listener support means a lot. Our Plant Stories is an independent podcast presented and produced by me, Sally Flatman. Thank you for listening. If you want to show your support for this podcast via Buy Me a Coffee, then the link is in the show notes or on the website ourplantstories.com. I promise you, your virtual coffee will go towards the podcast, not plants.